The alarm clock rang at 6:30 a.m. sharp. Amanda Sue Whitman was already awake. She never slept through alarms. Routine mattered to her. It gave structure to her busy life between college, her student teaching assignment, and the small bakery her mother ran on Howard Avenue. That Wednesday morning in Biloxi felt ordinary, the kind of morning that never hints at tragedy. The air was cool, the streets quiet, and the faint smell of bread drifted from Whitman's bakery long before sunrise. Amanda tied her apron neatly around her waist and began arranging pastries in the glass display case. Her mother was in the back, mixing dough, while Amanda greeted the first few regular customers who came in before work. She smiled politely, packed their orders, and wiped the counter clean, just as she did every morning. By 7:15 a.m., she untied her apron and placed it on the hook behind the counter. Her mother reminded her to drive carefully and to call after class. Amanda nodded, grabbed her tan leather tote, and stepped outside. The sun had begun to rise, casting a soft golden light over the street. She unlocked her yellow Honda Civic, placed her teaching materials on the passenger seat, and adjusted the rearview mirror. Amanda's life followed a pattern of order and precision. She was known for her punctuality, her tidy handwriting, and the way she always left 10 minutes early for every appointment. She believed being late was a sign of disrespect. That was why everyone remembered the time she left that morning, exactly 7:32 a.m. Several neighbors saw her drive off. One waved from a front yard while collecting the morning paper. Another recalled the faint sound of her car radio playing softly as she turned onto the main road. It was an ordinary departure, but it would become a crucial timestamp in a case that would haunt Biloxi for decades. The distance between her home and Magnolia Elementary was less than 6 miles. On any normal day, Amanda would reach the school before 8 a.m., park near the teacher's lot, and begin setting up for her second-grade reading group. But this morning, she never made it. At 8:15 a.m., when she failed to arrive, the supervising teacher assumed she might have stopped for gas or been delayed by traffic on Highway 90. By 9 a.m., concern began to grow. Amanda's absence was unusual, almost impossible to imagine. The school secretary tried calling her home, but the line rang unanswered. Back at the bakery, her mother noticed the time as she boxed pastries for a catering order. It was unlike Amanda not to call. She checked the clock again, 10:15 a.m., and told herself her daughter must be busy with her students. Still, unease crept in, a quiet heaviness that she could not shake. By noon, that unease had turned into alarm. When the school confirmed Amanda had not shown up all morning, her mother's hands began to tremble. She called every friend, classmate, and relative she could think of. No one had seen her since she left home, at 2 p.m. Her stepfather drove along Amanda's usual route, scanning the roadside for any sign of the yellow Civic. He passed gas stations, parking lots, and empty stretches of highway. Nothing, not a single trace. When evening came, the sky turned a bruised shade of blue over Biloxi. The bakery's neon sign flickered as Amanda's mother stood behind the counter, waiting for headlights that never appeared. The phone rang constantly, friends offering to help, others asking questions she could not answer. At 7:45 p.m., the family reported her missing to the Biloxi Police Department. Officers arrived within the hour and began the standard checklist: last known location, vehicle description, clothing details. A missing persons report was filed, and patrol cars were alerted to watch for her vehicle. By nightfall, police cruisers moved slowly along the roads leading out of town. Flashlights cut through the darkness near ditches and wooded areas. Volunteers gathered at the bakery, forming small search groups. The community response was immediate and heartfelt. But as the hours passed, hope began to give way to fear. Amanda Sue Whitman had vanished without a trace. There were no skid marks on the road, no signs of a struggle near her usual route, and no witnesses who could recall seeing her car after 7:40 a.m. It was as if she had simply disappeared in daylight. When the clock struck midnight, the search was suspended until morning. Officers promised to continue at first light. The Whitman family stayed awake, sitting by the phone, listening to the silence between every ring. In a small Mississippi town known for its calm and familiarity, The sudden absence of a young woman would soon turn ordinary streets into crime scenes, and a quiet morning into the beginning of a mystery that would take nearly 40 years to solve by the time the morning bell rang at Magnolia Elementary. Mrs. Helen Morrison already noticed something unusual. Amanda Sue Whitman never missed a class. She was organized, responsible, and always arrived before the children. When 8:30 passed with no sign of her, Helen began checking the clock more often than usual. By 9:15, she called the university office to confirm Amanda's schedule, hoping there had been some misunderstanding. There was none. At first, no one imagined anything serious. A flat tire, a delayed errand, perhaps a forgotten appointment. It all seemed possible. But as the day continued, small pieces of normal routine began to feel heavier, out of place. By 10:01 a.m., Helen Morrison picked up the phone again, this time to call Amanda's home. No answer. She left a message with the bakery. Around noon, Amanda's roommate, Jenny Patterson, returned from her classes and noticed Amanda's bed still neatly made. Her purse was gone, along with her teaching materials, but her overnight bag and jacket were still hanging on the rack. Jenny called the bakery, expecting to hear that Amanda had stopped by. Instead, Elena Whitman's voice came through, quiet and uneasy. Neither of them had seen her since that morning. Jenny drove Amanda's usual route between the university, the bakery, and the elementary school 3 times that afternoon. Each trip ended the same way. No yellow Honda Civic, no trace of movement. The streets were calm, traffic light, the air unusually still. By evening, Jenny parked outside the bakery, where she found Elena standing near the doorway, looking toward the road as if expecting her daughter's car to appear. At 7:45 p.m., Elena made the call she had been avoiding all day. The Biloxi Police Department dispatched a patrol car to take the report. Officer Paul Landry and his partner arrived just after 8. They sat with the Whitman family, recording every detail. Amanda's description, the time she left home, the direction she drove, and her expected arrival at the school. The initial assessment followed routine procedure. Adults sometimes left without notice, especially young students under pressure. But Amanda's history of responsibility made that explanation unlikely. The officers requested a recent photo and the vehicle registration. Within an hour, a formal missing person alert was issued across Harrison County. Word spread quickly through the small community. Neighbors who had known Amanda since childhood began calling friends, forming impromptu search teams. Some walked the ditches near Old Highway 90 with flashlights. Others checked rest stops and parking lots. By midnight, a dozen volunteers gathered near the bakery, comparing notes and planning routes for the morning. The police began canvassing known routes, marking key points on a folded highway map. Patrol cars checked rural back roads leading toward Gulfport, while dispatchers radioed nearby departments to watch for the missing vehicle. Nothing surfaced. The yellow Civic remained unseen, and no one reported a young woman fitting Amanda's description. As the night grew colder, fear began to settle over Biloxi. This was not a city where people vanished. It was a place where neighbors left doors unlocked and greeted each other by name. The realization that something terrible might have happened to Amanda struck quietly, like a chill that refused to fade. At the Whitman home, Elena sat near the kitchen table, clutching her daughter's class photo. Every ring of the telephone made her heart race. Each time it was someone asking the same question she could not answer. Have they found her yet? Outside, the sound of engines came and went as search vehicles combed the outskirts of town. Officers checked riverbanks, motel lots, and wooded trails. They noted every empty field and isolated stretch where a car might have veered unnoticed. Each site ended the same, nothing. By 3 a.m., search efforts slowed. Volunteers were told to rest and return at first light. Officers maintained radio contact through the night, keeping watch for any movement or tip that could point to Amanda's whereabouts. When dawn broke over Biloxi on October 16th, the streets looked unchanged, the same quiet houses, the same bakery sign flickering on Howard Avenue. But Amanda Sue Whitman was still missing. There was no trace of her, no sign of her car, and no clue to explain where she had gone. The call came just after sunrise on October 17th. A trucker pulling into a rest stop off Highway 49 noticed a yellow Honda Civic parked near the far edge of the lot. It had been sitting there since the previous evening, untouched, its headlights faintly dimmed from a drained battery. Something about the stillness bothered him. He walked closer, looked through the window and saw a purse on the passenger seat. The keys were still hanging from the ignition. By 7:30 a.m., the Biloxi Sheriff's Department had cordoned off the area. The parking lot buzzed with low voices and flashing blue lights, cutting through the pale morning mist. Sheriff Thomas Bradley arrived first, followed by Detectives Ray Morrison and Linda Hayes. All three stood quietly for a moment, taking in the sight of the vehicle that the entire town had been searching for. Detective Hayes opened the driver's door carefully, gloved hands steady, the hinges creaking in the silence. Inside, the air was stale, with a faint metallic scent that was immediately recognizable. On the passenger seat sat Amanda's tan purse, unzipped. Inside were her wallet, student ID, and a few neatly folded lesson plans. Nothing appeared stolen. Bradley crouched near the driver's side, examining the floor mat and the pedals. A few specks of what looked like dried blood marked the lower edge of the seat. On the dashboard, a fine layer of dust covered the surface, suggesting the car had been stationary for at least a full day. Detective Morrison leaned into the open door and spotted something small near the gear shift, a broken fingernail. He picked it up carefully with tweezers and placed it into an evidence bag. Nearby, another faint smear of blood traced the inside of the door handle. It was barely visible, but enough to confirm what they already feared. The car itself showed no signs of forced entry. The ignition was untouched, and the driver's seat was adjusted to Amanda's usual height. That detail disturbed the investigators most. It meant whoever had been with her did not need to alter the seat, suggesting either a brief encounter or a sudden, violent interruption. A forensics team began documenting every inch of the vehicle. Photographs captured the scene under the early sunlight, the reflection of the roof in the hood, the shallow shadows cast by the truck stop's overhead lights, and the single vehicle that now held the weight of an entire town's fear. Deputies searched the surrounding area, walking through the gravel lot and into the thin line of woods beyond. Tire tracks near the edge indicated another vehicle had pulled in close to the Civic at some point, though the impressions were partial and could not be identified. The grass showed signs of a struggle, a scuffed patch of dirt, a faint heel mark, and broken twigs leading a few feet into the brush. Detective Hayes knelt by the edge of the tree line, noting the direction of the disturbed ground. It led nowhere conclusive, fading into the damp soil. Still, the pattern suggested movement, not random, but hurried. Sheriff Bradley called for the scene to be sealed off until forensic teams completed a full sweep. He stood by the car, silent, watching technicians work. Even after decades in law enforcement, the quiet inside that vehicle unsettled him. It was not the sight of blood or the broken nail that lingered. It was the eerie sense of absence, as if the air itself held what Amanda had endured. By noon, the Civic was towed to the county impound lot for deeper examination. Reporters began gathering near the highway, their questions met with brief, cautious answers. The Sheriff's Department issued a statement confirming that the missing vehicle had been found, but no sign of Amanda had been located. Inside the evidence lab, samples from the blood smears and the fingernail were cataloged for testing. Every item from the car, the purse, the papers, the fabric fibers, was logged and sealed. It was methodical work, performed with the knowledge that each detail might be the key to unlocking what had happened in those final moments. When the initial forensic results came back, one detail stood out. The traces of blood and the broken nail indicated a struggle. Amanda had likely fought back. But the investigators hit an immediate wall. No fingerprints, no foreign hair samples, and no DNA matched anyone in the national database. For Sheriff Bradley and his team, that discovery shifted the tone of the entire investigation. The case was no longer a missing person search. It was something far darker, and they were staring at its first undeniable evidence. By the morning of October 18th, the missing persons case had become a full criminal investigation. The discovery of Amanda Sue Whitman's car changed everything. Detectives Ray Morrison and Linda Hayes began their interviews early, moving systematically from family to friends to classmates, building a picture of who Amanda had been and what might have happened in the hours before she vanished. At the Whitman home, the interview was careful and procedural. Eleanor Whitman sat at the kitchen table, her voice low but steady. She described her daughter's habits in detail. The way Amanda planned her week in a small blue notebook, her habit of leaving precisely on time each morning, and her tendency to call if she was running late. Elena could not name a single reason Amanda would disappear on her own. Detectives then spoke with Amanda's stepfather, who recalled nothing unusual that morning. He mentioned her calm mood and the small breakfast she ate before leaving for the bakery. Every word reinforced what investigators already sensed. Amanda's life left little room for chaos. Her routines were precise, almost predictable. That very reliability made her sudden disappearance even more troubling. At the University of Southern Mississippi's Biloxi campus, classmates remembered her as quiet, disciplined, and kind. Jenny Patterson, her roommate, described her as cautious, someone who always locked her doors and avoided going out late. Jenny mentioned that Amanda had seemed distracted the week before she vanished, but she could not say why. Police records began to fill with statements. Every person close to Amanda painted the same portrait, a young woman focused on her future, her education, and her work with children. She had no enemies, no known conflicts, and no history of impulsive behavior. Still, investigators needed suspects. By cross-referencing witness accounts and phone logs, 3 early leads emerged. The first was a former boyfriend, Daniel Reeves. The relationship had ended several months earlier after Amanda told friends he had grown possessive. Reeves denied any involvement, claiming he had not seen or spoken to her in weeks. His alibi placed him at work the morning she disappeared, confirmed by his supervisor. But detectives remained cautious. The second lead came from a report of a man seen loitering near the university parking lot 2 days before Amanda vanished. A student described him as middle-aged, wearing a gray jacket, and sitting in a dark pickup truck. He appeared to be watching female students as they left class. The description was too vague for identification, but the report was noted. The third lead involved a vehicle. A highway patrol officer recalled passing a yellow car similar to Amanda's early on the morning of October 15th, followed closely by a light-colored van. The information was logged, and investigators issued a request for any similar van sightings within the county. As the leads multiplied, so did the coordination between departments. The Biloxi Police and the Harrison County Sheriff's Department began working jointly, holding daily briefings and mapping Amanda's known movements. A command post was set up at the sheriff's office with case files stacked high across long wooden tables. Detectives charted timelines, tracked vehicle reports, and reviewed call records. Forensic results from the Honda Civic arrived midweek. The partial blood sample matched Amanda's blood type. Beyond that, the evidence revealed nothing new. No foreign fingerprints were identified. Fibers found on the driver's seat were consistent with her own clothing. It was as if the car itself had been wiped clean, leaving behind only faint signs of struggle. Days turned into weeks, and every lead that once seemed promising dissolved into uncertainty. Witnesses second-guessed what they had seen. Descriptions blurred with time. Each interview added fragments of truth, but no clear path forward. Then, during a final review of Amanda's personal belongings, Detective Hayes opened a small box from her bedroom. Inside was a diary, its pages filled with notes about her classes, her students, and her thoughts. Near the end of the last entry, one sentence stood out in careful handwriting. "Lately, I keep feeling like someone is watching me." It was not a detail they could ignore. It was the first real hint that Amanda Sue Whitman might have known danger was near, long before anyone else saw it coming. By late October 1986, the investigation turned toward a single name that kept resurfacing in witness statements: Marcus Thompson, 24 years old, a local mechanic, and Amanda Sue Whitman's former boyfriend. Their relationship had ended months earlier, quietly at first, but those close to Amanda recalled tension in the final weeks. Marcus had struggled to accept the breakup. He still called occasionally, asking to meet. Amanda had begun ignoring the calls. Detectives Ray Morrison and Linda Hayes obtained Marcus's address from employment records. He lived in a small trailer outside Biloxi, near an auto repair shop where he worked part-time. When officers arrived, Marcus appeared calm but guarded. His hands were stained with grease, his eyes tired. He allowed the detectives inside without resistance. The interior was sparse, a couch, a small table, and a cluttered workspace filled with car parts. But within minutes, the search revealed several troubling items. On a shelf above his desk sat a photograph of Amanda taken during her college orientation, the edges worn and the center circled in red ink. In a drawer, investigators found a short length of rope cut unevenly at both ends and a stack of magazines focused on crime and missing persons. Marcus denied everything. He said the photograph was old and that he had kept it out of habit, not obsession. The magazines, he explained, were borrowed from a coworker. The rope, he claimed, came from the repair shop where he worked, common nylon used for securing car hoods during transport. Still, the discovery shifted the tone of the investigation. For the first time, detectives believed they had someone capable of violence. They brought Marcus to the sheriff's office for questioning. Inside the small interview room, the clock ticked steadily above the table. Detective Morrison began by outlining the evidence. He asked where Marcus had been the morning of October 15th. Marcus stated he started his shift at 8 a.m. at Gulf Auto Service and stayed there until late afternoon. His supervisor later confirmed the start time, but the first 2 hours of the morning remained unaccounted for. Detective Hayes pressed him about his behavior that week. Had he tried to see Amanda? Had he followed her? Marcus's responses stayed consistent. He denied seeing her, denied waiting near her route, and denied owning any vehicle that matched witness reports. His voice was steady, his hands clasped tightly on the table, but his expression betrayed strain. Outside the interview room, Sheriff Thomas Bradley reviewed the evidence with the district attorney. The case looked thin. There was no physical proof linking Marcus to the scene, no fingerprints in the car, no trace of his DNA on the blood sample or the fingernail. Yet, his connection to Amanda made him the logical target of public suspicion. When word of his interrogation reached the community, the backlash was swift. Local newspapers ran headlines naming him as a person of interest. Neighbors stopped speaking to his mother. Customers avoided his repair shop. Within a week, Marcus was fired from his job. Reporters gathered outside his trailer, shouting questions through the thin aluminum walls. His mother told police she received threatening phone calls at night. Windows were broken twice. Rumors spread that Marcus had confessed, though he had not. Inside the department, detectives struggled between pressure and evidence. The public demanded an arrest. The family wanted closure. The sheriff's office wanted progress. Yet every time they reviewed the case files, the gaps in proof became impossible to ignore. The rope, the magazines, the photo. All disturbing, but none criminal. During a follow-up interrogation, Marcus broke down under questioning. His shoulders slumped, his voice cracked, but his words never changed. "I did not hurt her," he repeated. "I loved her once, but I let her go." The statement was recorded, time-stamped, and added to the growing pile of transcripts. By November, the district attorney began preparing the paperwork for an arrest warrant. The evidence was circumstantial, but enough in their view to justify charges. Then, just as the case seemed ready to move forward, the forensic lab called with new results. The fibers from the rope did not match any material found in Amanda's car. They were from a different brand and manufacturing line entirely. Even more significant, the handwriting analysis on the red ink circle over Amanda's photograph excluded Marcus as the writer. The marks were consistent with a finer pen style, unlike the heavier stroke used in his known samples. The new findings dismantled the prosecution's case. Marcus Thompson could not be connected to either key piece of evidence. Detectives stared at the report in silence. After weeks of pressure, suspicion, and community outrage, the man they had nearly arrested was suddenly slipping out of focus. The investigation had lost its direction, and with it, the fragile hope of finding Amanda Sue Whitman. The forensic report had already weakened the case against Marcus Thompson. But it was Detective Linda Hayes who uncovered the detail that completely dismantled it. One late evening, long after most of the department had gone home, Hayes sat in her small office surrounded by stacks of files. She had been rereading Amanda Sue Whitman's personal belongings, the journals, class notes, and letters seized early in the investigation. Most of it was routine, study schedules, reflections about her classes, and hopes of becoming a teacher. But buried inside the last notebook, between class notes and grocery lists, Hayes noticed a faint pencil line that earlier investigators had overlooked. The entry was dated just 3 days before Amanda disappeared. It read, "It's not Marcus. I saw him when the car was following me home." Hayes froze. She read the sentence again and again, tracing the faded handwriting with her finger. It was unmistakably Amanda's. The note referred to an earlier fear, the feeling of being watched, but it also cleared Marcus completely. Amanda had seen Marcus elsewhere at the same time the mysterious car was following her. Hayes called Detective Morrison immediately. Within an hour, the note was verified, documented, and photographed. The department's mood shifted from tense anticipation to silent disbelief. For weeks, they had pursued Marcus as their main suspect. Now Amanda's own words, the words of the victim, contradicted their entire theory. The next morning, Marcus Thompson was released quietly from questioning. There was no formal apology, no public announcement. Reporters received a brief statement from the Harrison County Sheriff's Department, noting that the investigation had expanded to consider other leads. But for Marcus, the damage was already irreversible. His reputation had been destroyed. His job was gone, his neighbors had turned against him, and his mother's home had been vandalized. When he walked out of the sheriff's office, there were no cameras waiting, just silence. Inside the department, morale sank. Detectives faced harsh criticism from local media for their handling of the case. Commentators accused them of tunnel vision, of rushing to judgment without solid evidence. Sheriff Bradley ordered an internal review, demanding to know how the diary entry had been overlooked for so long. Hayes, who had discovered it, felt equal parts relief and guilt. Relief that Marcus was innocent, guilt that their oversight had nearly ruined an innocent man's life. Public confidence in the investigation plummeted. Residents of Biloxi, once eager for justice, began to doubt the competence of local law enforcement. Rumors swirled that the real killer had slipped through their fingers. Late that evening, Detective Hayes placed the diary back into an evidence box and stared at Amanda's photograph pinned to the board. The words echoed in her mind. It's not Marcus. If Amanda knew it was not him, then who had been following her? And worse, had that person been close enough to mislead them all along? The realization settled heavily over the room. The real perpetrator was still out there, and might be hiding in plain sight. Time moved quietly in Biloxi. Weeks became months, and months turned into years. What began as a citywide manhunt slowly faded into memory. Flyers once taped to store windows peeled under the sun. The yellow Honda Civic sat in an impound lot, unclaimed evidence of a mystery that refused to be solved. By 1988, most of the original task force had been reassigned. The tips had stopped coming. The reward posters were gone. Detectives no longer spoke about the Whitman case during morning briefings. There were newer crimes to solve, new faces to pursue. The file, labeled Whitman, Amanda Sue, Missing, Presumed Homicide, was moved from the active caseload to the basement archives. It joined hundreds of other forgotten folders, names and lives now reduced to case numbers and brittle photographs. But one man never stopped thinking about it. Detective Ray Morrison could not let go. He kept Amanda's photo pinned above his desk, even after the department told him to clear old files. Her eyes, bright and young, stared back at him every morning. He remembered her mother's voice the day they met, calm but breaking beneath the surface. "Find my daughter," she had said. Morrison had promised he would. It was a promise that would come to define his career. In 1991, when the department officially classified the case as cold, Morrison signed the paperwork himself. He placed the box on the archive shelf, but he never stopped checking it out. Every few months, he reopened the files, reading through the same witness statements and forensic notes, looking for something he might have missed. Technology advanced, and with every new method, DNA typing, digital fingerprinting, trace analysis, Morrison sent requests to the state lab. He knew most of the evidence had degraded with time, but he refused to give up. Some of his colleagues called it an obsession. He called it duty. Years passed. Officers came and went. The town changed. Magnolia Elementary, where Amanda was supposed to teach, hired new staff and new students filled its classrooms. The bakery her mother once owned closed in 1997. The Whitman house was sold 2 years later. Still, Morrison kept writing letters, one each year, asking for the case to be re-examined. Most came back with the same response. Insufficient material for analysis. Amanda's mother, Elena Whitman, never stopped writing either. She mailed letters to police headquarters every Christmas, asking if there was anything new. Most went unanswered. Over time, her handwriting grew shaky, her words shorter. By 2010, even the local paper had stopped mentioning Amanda's name. The case had become a story told only in whispers, a reminder of how quickly hope could fade. Then, in the spring of 2019, Morrison received a call he had long dreaded. Elena Whitman had passed away at age 76. She died quietly in her sleep, her daughter's photo still framed beside her bed. Morrison attended the funeral in silence. There were only a few people there, distant relatives, a couple of old neighbors. When the ceremony ended, he stood beside her grave longer than anyone else. He did not speak, but he made himself a quiet vow. He would reopen the case, no matter how long it took, no matter who tried to stop him. As the wind moved through the cemetery trees, he turned away, carrying that promise with him. Amanda's mother was gone, but her unanswered questions remained, waiting for someone to bring the truth back to light. The glow of computer monitors replaced the hum of typewriters. The Mississippi Bureau of Investigation's Cold Case Division in Jackson was a world built on silence, the kind of silence that carried the weight of old stories. Digital archives stretched across endless databases, each folder a name once spoken on the evening news. Detective Sarah Mitchell moved through that silence with measured focus. At 41, she had spent nearly 2 decades in law enforcement, but she had never forgotten where she started, as a young trainee under Detective Ray Morrison. He had taught her that justice had no expiration date. Now, decades later, she carried that same belief as head of the Cold Case Division. On the morning of March 8, 2024, she sat alone at her desk, reviewing a backlog of digitized case files. The Whitman case, Duggar County 86-1247, was among them, its details condensed into neat digital entries. Victim, Amanda Sue Whitman. Missing, October 15, 1986. Vehicle recovered, October 17. Status, unresolved. Mitchell scrolled through the scanned images of evidence logs and faded Polaroids. The yellow Honda Civic, the fingernail fragment, the faint traces of blood on the car's door handle. She knew the story by heart. Morrison had told it to her more than once, always ending the same way with a quiet, unfinished sentence. A soft chime interrupted her thoughts. An email notification appeared on the corner of her screen. Subject, DNA match. Case Duggar, 86-1247. Sender, Rebecca Torres, Forensic Biology Unit. Mitchell's pulse quickened. For nearly 40 years, there had been nothing, not a single viable lead. She opened the message. Inside, a single paragraph confirmed what no one had dared hope for. A partial sample submitted from item Duggar 12, presumed. Blood trace recovered from the interior door handle of the victim's vehicle has produced a 99.97%, matched to a profile newly entered into CODIS. The sender's name stood out beneath the text. Rebecca Torres, Senior Forensic Analyst. Mississippi State Crime Lab. Mitchell read the message again, her hands still. The lab had reprocessed hundreds of cold case samples when the state upgraded to next-generation DNA sequencing. Most yielded nothing, but this one had. After nearly 4 decades, a name had finally surfaced. a genetic fingerprint that belonged to someone alive, traceable, and in the system. The room felt smaller. The screens hummed. Somewhere in the building, a printer clicked to life. But Mitchell did not move. She reached for her phone and called the number listed at the bottom of the email. Torres answered on the first ring. Her voice was steady but low, the way someone speaks when holding something heavy. "Detective Mitchell, I was going to call you. The results came through early this morning." Mitchell asked the only question that mattered. "Do we have a name?" Torres hesitated. "Yes, but before I send the file, I need to speak to you in person." Mitchell frowned. "Is there a problem with the match?" A pause. Then Torres said quietly, "No, the match is strong. But there is something else you need to know about this profile." The line went silent. Mitchell stared at the flickering monitor, the name Amanda Sue Whitman glowing faintly on the screen. After 38 years of unanswered questions, the case had come alive again. But something in Torres's tone told her that the truth waiting on the other side of that meeting would not be simple. The ghosts of 1986 were stirring once more. The following morning, Detective Sarah Mitchell arrived at the Mississippi State Crime Lab before sunrise. The halls were quiet, lined with sterile white walls and the faint scent of disinfectant. Rebecca Torres was waiting inside the DNA analysis room, her computer already displaying the match results. Without a word, she handed Mitchell a printed summary. At the top of the page was a name that had never appeared in the Whitman investigation before. Robert Allen Duggar, age 62. His DNA had entered the system only the previous year after a misdemeanor assault charge in Gulfport. The match percentage read 99.97%. The trace blood sample from Amanda Whitman's Honda Civic linked directly to him. Mitchell read the report twice before speaking. "Robert Duggar. Was he ever interviewed back then?" Torres shook her head. "No record of it. But his address history places him near Biloxi in 1986. He worked as a truck driver. And there is something else you need to see." Torres opened a scanned copy of the original case file. It was an evidence inventory sheet from October 17, 1986, the day Amanda's car was found. Among the items listed was a faded truck stop receipt, time-stamped 2 days before her disappearance. At the bottom, written in blue ink, was a name, R. Duggar. Mitchell felt the air shift around her. The coincidence was too sharp to ignore. For decades, that receipt had meant nothing, one of hundreds of minor leads lost to time. But now, nearly 40 years later, it connected directly to a living suspect. She took the file and returned to headquarters, where Lieutenant James Rodriguez, head of the Violent Crimes Unit, joined her in the conference room. Together, they began retracing Robert Duggar's life, one fragment at a time. Duggar had been 24 in 1986, a long-haul truck driver for a small logistics company operating along the Gulf Coast. Records showed that he often stopped at the same Biloxi truck stop where Amanda's car was discovered. He lived in a rented trailer on the outskirts of town and left Mississippi abruptly in late October that year, less than 2 weeks after Amanda vanished. Mitchell and Rodriguez pieced together a pattern through archived employment files and DMV records. Duggar had moved frequently between Mississippi, Alabama, and Louisiana during the late 1980s, taking short-term driving jobs and using post office boxes for mail. His work history grew patchy by the 1990s, and then he seemed to disappear from the system entirely until resurfacing in Gulfport decades later. Rodriguez leaned over the map they had pinned to the wall. Red markers traced Duggar's last known stops before Amanda's disappearance, each point falling within a 20-mile radius of Biloxi. "He was right there the entire time," Rodriguez said quietly. Mitchell nodded. "And no one ever looked at him." The deeper they went, the clearer the timeline became. Duggar's employment logs showed a delivery run the day before Amanda vanished. The route passed directly by Magnolia Elementary, where Amanda was scheduled to teach that morning. When Mitchell compared his truck stop logbook to the date on the receipt found in Amanda's car, the alignment was exact. Same location, same window of time. The pieces that once refused to fit were now falling into place. Still, Mitchell knew DNA alone was not enough. They needed more, something that could tie Duggar physically to Amanda's vehicle. She requested a review of the latent fingerprint database, asking technicians to re-examine the old partial print recovered from the Honda Civic's door handle. It had remained unidentified for nearly 4 decades. Hours later, the results arrived. The computer cross-referenced the preserved partial with Duggar's new prints, recently collected during his 2023 arrest. Match confirmed. Mitchell stared at the screen, her expression unreadable. The same man whose DNA was found inside. Amanda's car had also left his fingerprint. On the driver's side handle, the very place investigators believed Amanda had struggled before being taken. After 38 years of silence, the evidence finally spoke. Robert Duggar was no longer a name in an old receipt. He was the man Amanda Sue Whitman had fought that morning, and the man who had escaped justice for almost 4 decades. On a humid August morning in 2024, unmarked vehicles surrounded a small, weathered house on the outskirts of Gulfport, Mississippi. The neighborhood was quiet, just the sound of cicadas and the distant hum of the highway. Inside the house, Robert Allen Duggar was eating breakfast when the knock came. Police. Open the door. He froze for a moment, then shuffled to the front porch. When he opened the door, the flash of badges filled the doorway. Detective Sarah Mitchell stood at the center, calm and deliberate. Duggar's eyes flickered in recognition, though he could not yet place her face. "Robert Duggar," Mitchell said, "you are under arrest for the abduction and murder of Amanda Sue Whitman." He did not speak. He raised his hands without resistance. The arrest was quiet. No struggle, no denial. Just the slow click of handcuffs closing around wrists that had escaped justice for nearly 40 years. At the Gulfport precinct, Duggar sat across from Mitchell and Lieutenant James Rodriguez in the small interrogation room. The walls were bare, the air cold. The man before them looked tired, white hair, wrinkled skin, and eyes that had seen too much of the road. Mitchell opened a folder and began reading. On October 17, 1986, Amanda Whitman's vehicle was found at a truck stop 15 miles outside Biloxi. Your signature, R. Duggar, appears on a receipt recovered from that same location. Blood recovered from her car door was tested and produced a 99.97% DNA match to you. A fingerprint lifted from the driver's handle also matches your right index finger. Duggar's gaze remained steady, though his hands trembled slightly. "You are saying that means I killed her?" he asked, his voice low. Mitchell did not answer immediately. She slid a photograph across the table. Amanda Sue Whitman, 22, smiling in her university portrait. She disappeared on the morning of October 15th. You were at that truck stop within hours of her disappearance. Your DNA and print were both found on her vehicle. For a moment, Duggar stared at the image. Then he leaned back, expression blank. "I do not know that girl," he said flatly. "You have the wrong man." Mitchell kept her tone steady. "The evidence says otherwise." The hours passed in silence, broken only by the hum of the air vent. Mitchell repeated each piece of evidence slowly. The fingernail fragment recovered from the passenger seat, the partial blood smear, the handwritten note from Amanda's diary about being followed. Each fact struck with quiet precision. Eventually, Duggar exhaled heavily and looked down at his cuffed hands. "You keep saying I killed her," he muttered. "It was not supposed to happen like that." Mitchell glanced at Rodriguez, then leaned forward. "Tell me what was supposed to happen, Robert." He rubbed his temples, avoiding her eyes. "She was at the truck stop. I had seen her before. I just wanted to talk. She looked scared, thought I was following her. We argued. She tried to leave, and I grabbed her arm. Then she hit me, and I panicked." His words came haltingly, as though pulled from somewhere deep and reluctant. "It was a fight that got out of hand," he continued. She fell. "I did not mean for it to go that far." Mitchell kept her voice level. "You abducted her from that truck stop." He did not answer. His breathing quickened. The silence in the room thickened until he finally whispered, "I just wanted her to listen." Mitchell flipped open another page. "You left Biloxi less than 2 weeks later. You changed your address 4 times in 6 months. That was not panic, Robert. That was hiding." Duggar's shoulders slumped. His confession, incomplete and inconsistent, had crossed the line between denial and guilt. He had admitted enough to seal his fate. Still, One question remained, the question that had haunted investigators for decades. Mitchell looked directly at him. "Where is Amanda's body?" The room fell silent. The sound of the recorder ticking filled the air. Duggar stared at the tabletop, motionless. 1 minute passed. Then another. Finally, his eyes lifted. Distant, almost hollow. "I can show you," he said quietly. "But it has been a long time. I do not know what will still be there." The tape recorder clicked softly as Mitchell pressed stop. After 38 years of silence, the man who had hidden the truth for nearly half his life had finally begun to speak. 2 days after his confession, Robert Duggar was escorted from the Harrison County Jail under tight security. His wrists were bound, his expression unreadable. The convoy of vehicles moved slowly down the familiar Gulf Coast highway toward Biloxi, the place where everything had begun 38 years earlier. Under gray skies, Duggar guided investigators down a narrow dirt road just outside town, a secluded patch of pine and oak overgrown with vines and brambles. He said little as he walked, his eyes fixed on the ground. "It was somewhere around here," he murmured. Near the old service trail, the air was heavy, filled with the scent of wet earth. Detective Sarah Mitchell followed close behind, her notepad silent in her hand. She knew what they were about to find, yet part of her hoped they would not. After nearly an hour of searching, Duggar stopped beside a cluster of pine trees. He pointed to a shallow depression in the soil. "That is where I left her," he said. His voice was thin, almost swallowed by the wind. Crime scene technicians marked the perimeter with yellow tape. Shovels moved carefully through the layers of compacted dirt. It did not take long. Within minutes, a fragment of bone surfaced, then another. The site expanded as more skeletal remains emerged, each handled with deliberate care. When a small, corroded object was unearthed, one of the technicians paused. It was a class ring, its inscription still faintly legible, USM 86, Amanda S. Whitman. The area fell silent. No one spoke. Even Duggar looked away. Mitchell watched as the evidence team worked methodically, placing each fragment into labeled bags. Every movement was deliberate, respectful. There was no applause, no triumph, only the quiet acknowledgement that the search had finally ended. Amanda Sue Whitman had been found. The remains were transported to the Mississippi State Crime Lab, where forensic anthropologists confirmed the identity through dental records and DNA analysis. After 38 years, the Whitman family finally had an answer. Though the person who had waited the longest, Amanda's mother Elena, was gone. A week later, the Biloxi Police Department placed a bouquet of white lilies and a folded department letter on Elena Whitman's grave. The note read simply, "Your daughter has been found. She is home now." Detective Mitchell did not attend the press briefing that followed. She remained at the edge of the wooded clearing, long after the evidence trucks had left. The tape fluttered in the breeze, faint against the rustling leaves. She thought of Detective Ray Morrison, now retired and living quietly upstate, the man who had refused to forget. His belief that the case could still be solved had never wavered, even when the world had stopped listening. Mitchell took one last look at the marked ground. The soil had been turned, the evidence logged, the truth finally unearthed. All of it had started with a single email, a message that blinked on her screen one ordinary morning, pulling her into a mystery that had slept for nearly 4 decades. She stood in silence, watching the tape move in the wind, knowing that the story of Amanda Sue Whitman would never truly fade, not from Biloxi, and not from her own memory. In the weeks following the discovery, Robert Duggar was officially charged with first-degree murder, kidnapping, and obstruction of justice. The indictment came on August 28, 2024, 38 years to the month since Amanda Sue Whitman had vanished from the truck stop outside Biloxi. The story spread quickly. News networks across the country replayed archival footage showing the bright-eyed college student whose disappearance had haunted Mississippi for decades. Commentators called it justice at last, but inside the courthouse, the atmosphere was far from celebratory. Duggar, now 71, appeared frail during his first court appearance. His hands trembled slightly as he stood before the judge, his voice barely audible when entering a plea of not guilty. Behind him, rows of onlookers, journalists, retired officers, and residents who remembered the case filled the seats. Detective Sarah Mitchell sat quietly in the second row, her face expressionless. For her, it was not about victory. It was about closure. The trial began in late October 2024 at the Harrison County Circuit Court. Prosecutors presented the evidence with methodical precision, the DNA profile linking Duggar to the nail fragment, the fingerprint recovered from Amanda's car, and the corroborating forensic data from the newly enhanced samples. The jury listened as experts explained how technological advancements, once unimaginable in 1986, had made the breakthrough possible. When the state displayed the recovered class ring, the courtroom fell silent. Its tarnished gold surface told the story no words could. Amanda's engraved initials glimmered faintly under the lights, a symbol of both loss and persistence. Duggar's defense argued that his actions were the result of panic, not premeditation. They described a heated argument, an accidental death, and a man who had lived with guilt ever since. But the prosecution countered with cold, irrefutable evidence. The abduction, the concealment, the decades of deception. Intent, they argued, was written in every detail of what Duggar had done next. After 2 weeks of testimony, the jury deliberated for less than a day. The verdict, guilty on all counts. When the judge read the sentence, life in prison without parole, Duggar showed no visible reaction. He lowered his head as the bailiffs led him away, his footsteps echoing down the long corridor of the courthouse. Outside, cameras flashed and reporters shouted questions, but Detective Mitchell declined all interviews. She returned to her office in Jackson that evening and sat alone, the case file open before her. Inside were hundreds of pages, witness statements, photos, Morrison's handwritten notes, even the yellowed missing person flyer from 1986. She thought of Sue Whitman, who had passed away believing her daughter was still out there. She thought of Detective Ray Morrison, who had spent the last years of his career chasing leads no one else believed in. And she thought of Amanda, a young woman whose story had been frozen in time, waiting for someone to give it voice again. A month later, the Mississippi Bureau of Investigations held a quiet ceremony in Jackson. Detective Mitchell and members of the Harrison County Sheriff's Office received commendations for their work on the case. Morrison's name was read aloud in acknowledgement of his dedication. The applause was polite, restrained, not for celebration, but for remembrance. When Mitchell stepped forward to accept the plaque, she did not make a speech. She simply said, "This one belongs to everyone who refused to forget." In the years that followed, the Amanda Whitman case became a teaching model in law enforcement training programs nationwide. It highlighted how persistence, digital archiving, and DNA technology could bridge the gap between eras. Universities used it in forensic science courses as an example of cold case resurrection. Yet despite its place in textbooks and news retrospectives, the emotional weight of the case lingered. For many, it represented more than a solved mystery. It was a quiet reminder that the past never truly disappears. In her final report, Mitchell wrote, "Technology solved what memory could not. But memory is what kept us looking." Years later, she would still recall the moment her computer pinged with that email, DNA match, case Duggar 86-1247. One small notification that changed everything. On the last page of the case file, she wrote a single sentence, a reflection that would later close the department's internal report and documentary coverage of the case. The evidence had waited in silence for nearly 4 decades. All it needed was someone to listen.